So, morning, Sarah.
Morning, Jude. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Thank you so much for taking time to have a chat with me today. Obviously, you're down as a museum innovator and you're working at the British Museums at the minute. But we actually met through Petra Kuchar giving a sort of late night talk in the Jeff Museum Gardens quite a few months back. And I just thought it was a really great opportunity to ask you questions about we've both worked a little bit from different ends of the spectrum in terms of looking at diversity, inclusivity, co-design, but I just thought I'd really love to see how that affects your profession and your industry around museum curation, because ultimately you're engaging an entire nation, indeed a global audience, with incredible artifacts from around the world. But of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves, and I'd love to just go back to the beginning of how did you actually get into this business?
Yeah, well, a really not very traditional route, I have to say. I mean, I grew up in a small town and we didn't have a museum or gallery. I studied as a designer. I did silversmithing and jewellery, and then I taught three-dimensional design. And I was constantly taking my students out to museums and galleries in London, in Paris. We took them on trips. And I just thought, why don't I just go and work in a museum? Because I wanted to attract more students to do that. And I just really felt there weren't enough students going to museums at that time. It was a really exciting time. So I applied for a job at the V&A, and the V&A was going through some massive changes, rebranding itself. It started Friday Lates. The contemporary team had brought everything together. And I got this amazing job as student education officer, and I had to design events for students and attract students, and that's how my career started. I've never looked back.
Wow, and I mean, it always seems like one of those things where you think you're never going to get that job, and I think there's such a sort of a lesson in that of sometimes we worry too much and we overanalyze, but often I'm guessing you were just bringing a lot of energy and creativity to the situation. Would you say that was probably what got you the job, as it were?
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely the chat that got me the job, I would say, definitely. And, I was really passionate about students, and that's what they wanted. So it didn't matter if I didn't know the history, all of the history of design or all of this. I knew something. I could apply it, so... And it's the same now with the British Museum. What I would really say is that I am not an archaeologist. I haven't studied deep history. I haven't, studied the Romans. But what I bring to it is thinking about how audiences can engage with that material. And I think that's what's really important to remember. And I would say to people like applying for jobs like that, just think about what you can offer. You are unique and you've always got something to offer.
Mm. And I guess I was just picking up on one little word there that gives away your Scottish connection of chat. As having lived in Glasgow, it's kind of funny how certain words stick and give away your. But I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? You haven't always been located in London. It's been pretty broad.
It's so interesting. So my grandparents, my mother's Scottish, born in Glasgow, and my granddad was an engineer, and he came to England with his skills to do engineering, which is brilliant. And so I always thought, well, I want to go and give back to Scotland. I want to find out about my Scottish roots and give back. So after working at the V&A, I then decided to go up to Scotland and worked first in Edinburgh, National Museum Scotland, and then National Gallery Scotland, and then latterly at V&A Dundee, back with the V&A, but building a brand new design museum from scratch. And when I started, there was literally 5 or 6 of us, wow. And really it was thrilling, absolutely thrilling. To start a museum from scratch, you think about these museums, the British Museum is the oldest public museum. They're many years old. This was something brand new. So that time in Scotland was really important. And Scotland is such an innovative place and has produced so many designers, architects, artists, and they hadn't really been recognised. So that was what was really fascinating about V&A Dundee, trying to tell that story of Scottish design, which is really thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, having studied at the Glasgow School of Art as well as the Glasgow University, there's just a huge sense of heritage and commitment, and that art is taken very seriously. I mean, I know that sounds sort of you know, but I mean, when framing it against things like the Turner Prize, which has had its, you know, sort of controversies and different ways of looking at it, I kind of feel, you know, Scotland has always been a real, you know, powerhouse. It's really punched above its weight. I guess interestingly, I noticed sort of organisations from our discussions like Creative Scotland, and I definitely, that resonated with me as a really good support network. So how do you think these networks work, but also with the sort of obviously increased use, without making it all about COVID, of online things, how do you think those networks for creativity will change going forwards?
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Well, for a start, Creative Scotland I found to be like such a fantastic organisation. But not only that, local creative organisations like Creative Dundee in Dundee itself, you know, bringing together how a place can bring together all its creative people in one hub. And that was online and it was in person, obviously, as well. But I found that people were much more prepared to kind of share ideas, be quite open, and come together. What I found is coming back to England again, thinking about how do I find those designers? How do I connect with them? And I think that's why I naturally went towards Petra Kuchar, because I know that that's where you can meet a lot of creative people all in once. And I really want to bring and involve designers and artists in what we do at the British Museum. So it's an obvious place to start. But I think that whole network, I think we do need to get better at those creative networks with the cultural. Because just think about how much work there is in these cultural organisations to create things. You know, lots of opportunities for designers, exhibition designers, you know, we employ a lot, lighting design, all of those people. And really, you know, it's a way of nurturing, you know, we can provide work for those people, we can involve those people, and we can make things very creative. So that's always been, but Creative Scotland brings designers, artists, theatre, dance, everything under one umbrella. And I think that's what's the beauty of it, really. I think that's how it works so well.
And it seems like you've always had this sort of tremendous energy to almost create things which, of course, fulfill your job description of what you're supposed to do. But I've always got the impression that you've tried to do things that go beyond, you know, that have a life that isn't just the exhibition is closed, that's the end of it. So could you talk us about how you make things that endure in people's passions, homes? How do they live on beyond the event itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always trying to think about legacy. And when we do something, how can we build on it and not just see it as a finite project? In the cultural sector, what you often find is you'll get a 3-year grant for something. And we need to be looking much more beyond that. We need to be looking at, you know, in Dundee, what we did with V&A Dundee is looked at trying to get funding sources for 10 years. So for instance, we got the local authority in Dundee to fund a seconded teacher every year for 10 years to come into the museum. So you've got 10 teachers who'd have all this amazing training and take back into schools. And those sorts of relationships are innovative relationships that you need to go out there and get them and make them. And I think that's the way that I try to think is not just see something as, oh, this funder wants to, you know, has got a fund opening, let's apply for 3 years. Really think about how you're going to embed that in your organisation. Otherwise, the post will just end. And then all those people that you've taken on this journey, what happens to them, you know? So we do have to be very careful with thinking about that. And with, I suppose that, you know, we're going to talk a bit about the LGBTQ work that the museum has been doing, and that's built over many years from about 2015. Wow. You know, so it's been going on quite some time. But that you really need to keep going with that work. That work doesn't stop.
Well, maybe that's a good place for me to just jump in and share screen, if that's all right. So we've got a couple of your images here. So talk us through them.
Yeah, so these are a couple of images from an exhibition, a touring exhibition. So part of my role is national programmes. So we lend around 2,500 objects around the UK every year. And part of that is touring exhibitions and spotlight loans. And one exhibition that was touring last year is this amazing exhibition called Desire, Love, Identity, LGBTQ Histories. And it came out of a lot of work the museum have been doing for many years, researching the collections and finding these objects and different histories, looking at the collection through different lenses. My colleague Stuart Frost, who worked on this exhibition, and some other colleagues as well, they put together this exhibition, which was first at the British Museum and then it toured. These badges that you're looking at here are part of a collection of thousands of LGBTQ badges that the museum has collected. They're absolutely amazing. And as part of the kind of, really they sit within the coins and medals department. So it's quite interesting. They come under that. And the keeper of coins and medals is really passionate about these objects. We pulled together some of these for the exhibition. And then the second image is the oldest image, the oldest object in the exhibition, which is from 9000 BC, and it's called the Ain Sakri Lovers, and it was found in a cave in around the Jordan area, and it's a cobble, it's a pebble basically, made of calcite, and it's the oldest depiction that we know of a couple in embrace. We don't know what gender this couple are. So that whole idea of gender and identity goes out the window. It's about human love and the fact that human same-sex love, desire, identity have been around for thousands and thousands of years, and this is something that we can see in history, and that's really what the exhibition was about. It was about getting away from this being a modern concept and thinking about how people saw each other in the past, and how human love, whoever you love, it doesn't matter who you love. Love is love. And I think that was the big message of this exhibition. The exhibition toured to 5 places in the UK. One of the places it toured to was Bolton, and that was a place that in the past this exhibition would not have gone to. The council would not have taken this exhibition. It was the place where 7 men, the Bolton 7 they were known as, they were gay and bisexual men, were convicted under the Sexual Offences Act in 1998. The last people to be convicted. And, so this was for somewhere like Bolton. What this exhibition could do was to bring the local community together, and that's what it did everywhere it went. It enabled people to tell their stories, to be proud, to have this sense of history, and it has been our most successful touring exhibition to date. It reached over 250,000 people, 250,000 people across the UK. It also went to Nottingham, to the Justice Museum. Great place to have it there as well, to think about legislation. This is something we still need to fight for in the world. Discrimination is still rife. So we feel things like this are something that cultural organisations can really help to change public perception, change ideas, and really bring the truth to people.
I mean, how have you sort of felt that history has helped frame things that I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel sometimes if you tackle an issue head on, you tend to put people who maybe disagree with it in a defensive mode, whereas it feels like by it being a sort of a museum artifact, it's almost a slightly sort of oblique sort of tangent, if you like, that gets people to gently reappraise, hold on a minute, well, actually this has been going on since the dawn of time, and why is it that we seem to have got ourselves in such a pickle, to understate it hugely.
I think that's where you're right, is that it is people getting themselves in a pickle, and what a museum, what an exhibition like this can do is to actually reframe things and actually set things out in a different way, and it gets people thinking. And when you think, you start to discuss, and you can open up ideas, and I think that it just allows people to have those conversations. Sometimes this is about people taking their parents to these exhibitions and having these conversations with them, these difficult conversations, and it's been a brilliant place to do that. It's also the exhibition has been allowed people to be creative and to talk about things that perhaps they haven't been able to talk about before with their friends or their family, or so it's and it's not going to change everybody's opinion, But what it does do is it gives some weight to the argument, and I think that's what, you know, something like the British Museum saying this is humanity, this is love, this is humanity, and we should embrace it. You know, it's not something to be concerned about. So I think that's, you know, it's a good message for us to be putting that out and putting that forward.
I guess if it's not getting too sort of broad and up into the philosophy of these things, but it feels at times like you see societies and civilizations go through changes. And so I wondered sort of what's been your perspective on our society, you know, of late. Does it have connection for you with like a certain period in history that you think, gosh, we've got all this new technology, but it resonates in terms of our emotional state? What has history taught you about where we're going, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, well, that's a very big question.
Big question.
Yeah, it is. I think where we are at the moment with what the world is going through it's a time where it's bringing everybody together, and we're all seeing each other. Everybody is experiencing the same thing across the world, and I think that in itself is a very interesting moment in history. Has that happened before in history? I mean, with world wars, obviously there's things happening across, you know, with empires going back in time to some of the biggest empires like the Assyrian Empire. You know, people were experiencing things, I suppose, at the same time. But what we've got now is this amazing global communication of how we know instantly what's happening around the world from moment to moment. So it is very different, but it does feel, I think it is a very special time because we've all been through something, and we're going through something that is incredibly harrowing, and it shows that we're all the same. And this is the same message that this exhibition says: we are all the same. We're all humans. We're all going through these same things. So I think if it can bring any empathy, if this can bring empathy between civilizations, between cultures, between faiths, which I think it will, and I think it is doing, then that in itself is a good outcome from what we're all having to go through.
No, I think that's a great answer to it. I regret asking a tough question there. but I mean, yes, I mean it speaks for itself that if I just look at one of the next slides of how well it's been reviewed in the press and the media from all different aspects of media coverage have really gone forward. But I guess it might be interesting just to talk about an exhibition that I absolutely loved, and I saw it myself on Manga, and I think for me it connected as I had only recently been out to Japan, and I'm a huge fan of Miyazaki's films, but it's interesting to consider like what happens not just when ideals collide, but artistic and creative processes collide as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So this was what you're seeing now is some images made by families taking the British Museum objects and sort of mangifying them, which I thought was just the most fun thing. And you can see those mummified cats on the right-hand side. They are utterly bonkers. Look at them. But actually, when you see a mummified cat, they do have these very strange expressions on their faces, and they're just absolutely wonderful. And the middle ones are a Japanese fish mangified, and then you've got the Mayan double-headed serpent there. That's an Aztec double-headed serpent. So so it's really exciting, and just to get families to do that and they look at how much creativity they brought to that. So this was an exhibition that you wouldn't perhaps expect the British Museum to do. And in fact, in the formative evaluation that we did, people said things like, oh, that's interesting the British Museum are doing that. Oh my God, I bet they'll make a hash of it. You know, that's the sort of comments that we had before the exhibition. So I hope they don't ruin it or something like this, which was brilliant. And then when we reviewed people afterwards, I got a quote here, and one says, "It made me feel that the museum was modern and innovative, that wasn't afraid to explore topics that are historically significant, but not based around historical events and artifacts." So not,
Yeah.
maybe less people know that the British Museum collects contemporary material from around the world. It's still collecting, and that's just a wonderful thing, and has collected manga for since manga began, since that genre began, and also can make the links historically in Japanese art to where this comes from. So I think that was what made it really wonderful. And for us, often our audience for exhibitions is over 55s, mainly majority over 55s. For this exhibition, we had 95% of the visitors were below 55, and 43% were 25 to 34. So for us, that is really amazing. Like we hadn't had, and we didn't even expect it to be that many, and we had 175,000 paying visitors to that exhibition. So great numbers for us. It was a risk for the museum to take, but the risk really, really paid off, and I think has shown our audiences that we have other things to offer than what you might expect, like our Troy exhibition recently. Obviously a great exhibition, but that's what you'd expect from the British Museum to do, to tell that story about an event in history or a myth or Greek history. So what, that was really lovely to do that, and it was really because of our Japanese curators who wanted to do this show and were so passionate about it, and then the learning teams then really brought that all together. I think there's another image, I don't know if you can see that, of a giant comic book that was made. So this is an example of us using working with artists to help to do these family programs that we run. And so all of those images on that giant comic are drawn by families, apart from the top right hand corner. But all of the rest of the narrative is done by families. So it's just like a really amazing thing. And I just love that image of that massive manga. And manga means pictures run riot, which I absolutely love, that idea of pictures running riot across the page. So it was a brilliant show, and I think it really taught us a lot about audiences and about how we can attract audiences. So you've got a couple of other images, I think, because I wanted to talk really about how we work with students as well. So this was, we worked with the Japanese fashion designer Kanzai Yamamoto, who made some of those costumes for David Bowie. Fantastic fashion designer. And we worked with him and London University of the Arts students, so London College of Fashion and some of the other colleges. And we also worked with students, he worked with students in Tokyo as well. And he flew out, he paid for it, flew out some of the London College of Fashion students and other London students to Tokyo as well as part of it. So it just shows, what you can do in collaboration. And he was so incredible. He wanted to do something at the British Museum. He'd done things at the V&A, he'd done things other places in the UK. And he just desperately wanted to do something to use the great court space. That space is an amazing space for audiences. It's like such a brilliant public space. I would say the sound, is difficult, but in terms of getting a lot of people to see something at once and just feeling part of something special, these students, we worked with them. It was Freddie Matthews, who's our adult program manager. He's absolutely amazing, and he made all the links with the students. But this really shows how you can look at history, you can look at objects, and you can be inspired by them to create something like this. And all museum and gallery collections have the potential to do that. And I think that's such a good message to any design students out there thinking about what they might be able to do. We're here for you, for your research, and to support you to do that.
Well, I think there's always that assumption, isn't there, that sort of, there's a lone genius myth. And yet he's obviously reaching out and creating something with a whole team. And indeed, I can't think of anything more noble than, when you've made it a little bit, to say the least, wanting to engage the next generation with a little bit of the cash that he put into this, I just think is, I think it's one of those things that's quite interesting, because would you say that it's fair to generalize, and forgive me, but America seems to do a lot of opening galleries, and there's a lot of plaques, brass plaques with names of opened by Senator this or patron that, and I wondered why do you think that the British culture is somewhat different about the way it it communicates its generosity and altruism for these things?
I mean, I think, obviously we rely on lots and lots of donors and funders for everything we do, like our national programme is funded by the Dorset Foundation, for instance. So we do recognise those people, but I think you're right, in terms of philanthropy, there are people, we have funders who do not want us to mention their names, and that's just absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's amazing. On the other hand, we have corporate funders who we do need. We want to, they want to, and we want to, and we will work. I think the cultural organisations work very well with funders. So much of our funding comes from trusts and foundations, individual donors, corporate sponsors, our exhibition programme obviously as well, and it enables us to do this amazing work, and then we can have this generosity, but yeah, individual donors and that Kanzai in that respect is an individual donor. He's giving his time, and that's really fantastic.
Well, I think it wasn't to lead it to say that it has to be obviously good or bad, and that being overly pious and humble is somehow the best virtue. Because I feel, strangely, I know that I've always been into sort of podcasts for a long time, and I always hear certain names, like, not to name drop, but Alfred P. Sloan Foundation now means sort of linked to my sort of psyche with sort of science and discovery and exploration. And so I actually think a use of a name when it's meaningful to be a sort of a networking effect to help people discover other things. I mean, I feel that's almost one of the hardest things. Just if we were to jump back to the LGBTQ situation, you actually need icons. You need, David Bowie. You need people like this to articulate what is sometimes very hard for people who aren't as eloquent or aren't as confident, or let's just face it, don't even have the confidence and charisma to go out there and effectively, lead the fight for change.
Absolutely.
Or indeed, I make it sound like change really just coming back to what we always were, I should say, obviously.
Yes, absolutely.
Looking at history. But I guess that's what, looking at the other thing with manga, the thing that struck me with the exhibition was just also how, I guess you could say it almost felt a little bit, you could say art is almost a bit Darwinian at times in that it has branches. And I'm not trying to, forgive me if I'm mincing my words here, but there's something that is almost a bit contradictory about human nature, that on the one time we crave togetherness, be it through sexuality and expression, be it through genres in art, whilst at the same time strenuously defining ourselves as other and different. So I wonder, what do you think that, I'm honestly not asking a question I know the answer to here, but why do you think we have this tendency to want to be together and at the same time desperately apart and unique?
Oh gosh, what an amazing question. I think the togetherness, the whole idea, what I see when we bring people into the museum together to celebrate, something like we had our Islamic World Gallery opening, and we just seeing the people there, the joy on people's faces. People do want to get together, and I think that's what we're all missing at the moment, that feeling of being in each other's company and just celebrating together. It's just the most fabulous thing, and seeing something amazing that really wows you. I remember when I was really wowed when I got my first job in museums at the V&A by hearing music in a museum, pop music or whatever music, dance music, amazing. I mean, it's just, it was beyond, it was another level, and it took things into another level. And I think that joy in that, people love experiences. They love to experience things. I think our exhibitions, all our, museums and galleries have got a long way to go with creating experiences in, exhibitions. It's hard to create emotion in an exhibition. And I think this is a real challenge for designers in the future. How can we really, in the same way that theatre has done so successfully, how dance has done it so successfully, how can we generate emotion in exhibitions of art, in, it's much harder. These things are static. How do we bring them to life? And that's the same with museums throughout. You know, this is a question that I'm always grappling with. How can we create immersive experiences in museums? So that is definitely something. Why do we want to also be unique as well as be together? That's our creative spirit. I mean, that is, you know, what sets you apart from. It's also probably something to do with our gene. It's something to do with our wanting to do well. You know, we want to set ourselves apart, whether it's a business we want to make. We need to be able to make money, so we need to do something better than the next person. So it's those two things clashing. We want to do things together, but we also want to do, like you say, be individuals. It's a real challenge.
And I guess that's what always makes these jobs exciting, is that it sounds like, you know, you mentioned that there's a degree of strenuous effort going into what you're doing to get it right. And I think that, you know, certainly from my experience, those have usually been the best projects, where you don't walk into a job going, I can do this blindfolded. You know, it's that you really are going to have to, as they say, put the planes on the plane as it's going off the edge of the cliff, you know. So I kind of feel really excited to see where you're going to go with that. And I guess, you know, there's some incredible images of togetherness and people sharing.
If you go back to that one before, just you did, because I just wanted to show you this, because this is our Little Feet program for under fives.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I think babies any age need to go into museums, and in Little Feet, we do it in the exhibitions, but it's a morning where only the under fives and their parents, carers can go in, and it's just fabulous. And they do all sorts of activities, and it's just joyful.
And I think that's also the thing that sometimes, you know, surprises people, is that, you know, we have a lot of sort of baggage and preconceptions about what children are capable of achieving, or what children are capable of grasping. And I think it is, and I mean, in many ways, I look at this and think, this reminds me a bit of, I'm sure you're familiar with Reggio Emilia, where they would just let children go nuts in huge sheets of paper. And usually it was a lot cheaper and less structured than this. But if anything, it's actually adults who can't fill the blank sheet. Children never actually struggle at all. They will approach it with zero trepidation. I think it's almost, we spend a lot of our years trying to reconcile the fact that in learning process and structure, we also still have to, you know, develop our capability to you know, remain loose and free and sensitive to the medium that we're working in.
Definitely, because that fear kind of sets in at some point as to, I don't want to put anything down, or I don't want to try this. But, you know, if you do, then you'll get the rewards from that. So
forgive me for putting you on the spot here, but what is it that you feel are some themes or agendas which you feel just haven't been tackled at all, or indeed adequately with enough impact that museums could step into?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that we've just started really working on is looking at disability histories in the collection. So again, looking at the collection through a different lens. We've just, she started fairly recently, a PhD student with us who we're supervising. It's a collaborative PhD. These collaborative PhDs are amazing. And
sorry, could you break it down what one is? I've never actually heard of one.
Well, it's really interesting. It's an opportunity for PhD students to work with an industry organisation like ourselves, a museum, and partly be at the university as well. In this case, it's Leicester University and the British Museum working together. But I had 4 collaborative PhD students in Dundee when I was working on V&A Dundee, who I supervise as their industry supervisor. So it's just fantastic. It allows people to be in a business as a PhD student, researching, creating research that is also useful for the business and themselves and society, you know. So and Isabel, who's our PhD student, she has just started looking at disability history in the British Museum's collection. And what hasn't happened in the past is the curators haven't looked at disability history as a theme, because they're historians, they're archaeologists, they're looking at history in the broadest sense, and they're not necessarily focusing on quite a theme like that. So this is an area that I really think there needs to be a lot more work done on, because if you don't have the research, you can't tell those stories. And it's our responsibility as society to represent everybody. You should be able to come into a museum or gallery and see yourself represented and tell the full picture of history. We only tell a very narrow picture of history. So, this is what needs to happen in the future, and that's what we're working hard to do. So hopefully, with the start of a PhD student, plus we're going to have a researcher as well, who we're recruiting. Small steps, but this is how we worked on the LGBTQ work. We've got tours, we've got a trail in the museum, LGBTQ trail in the museum. We've got audio. You can go onto iTunes, and we've got audios for those as well. So you just gradually build up the material, and we're going to be doing some more research on the LGBTQ work as well. We've also got LGBTQ volunteers. So this idea of legacy, building until it's completely seamless, within the organisation. What's helped with that is staff in the organisation as well, having, involving staff, involving visitors, and that whole idea of co-design and making sure you involve people in the process.
I guess it's one of those things where, I guess I should probably frame this, but there's a phrase in fine art called outsider art, which,
yes.
Usually, correct me if I'm wrong, implies someone hasn't had a classical training or a further education or an apprenticeship in a fine art, but has somehow come to it through other means. And I wondered, sort of, do you almost feel, and forgive me, I'm clutching at the question here a little bit, but do you feel there's almost a necessity for things to embrace outsider perspectives for people who might not usually have curated or expressed something that needs to be talked about, but you're helping them articulate that?
I think, I don't know about the word outsider, because I think it's about everybody being equal. And but I get what you're saying
but it usually means people who have been marginalised.
That's right.
Quite often
absolutely.
outsider art was people with, mental illnesses or anxieties.
Absolutely, you're right.
And so it took time for people to acknowledge them as being legitimate artists.
Yes,
so I guess what I was kind of saying is to have people who have been marginalised, but actually they have a legitimate voice, even though they are by a percentage a minority, they're still just as valid. So
absolutely, and it is thinking about it's changing people's perceptions again, and it's not as if the curators don't have an interest in this area. It's just that it's never been part of their practice, and so so therefore it is new. And it's a new way of looking, but that makes it very exciting for all of those people that will be involved in this research, in looking at the collections in different ways, finding these stories, and just seeing that chink of inspiration come into their eyes when they go, oh yeah, actually we've got this and this object that we're going to have a look at, and actually, oh yeah, we could tell those stories. And that's exactly what happened with the LGBTQ research, that people hadn't necessarily, there's these 2 chocolate cups that were in the collection that were owned by these 2 ladies who lived together. They're lesbians, and they're wonderful, these cups. But they were they collected for that purpose, or is that a story that's emerged later? Because they're collected as decorative objects, European design. But then they've been made specially for this couple, these 2 women who loved each other, and it's so special. So that's you could tell that story of those objects and just say, oh, look at the lovely design, or you can tell the background story. And all objects have these background stories. They all have people connected with them. Who was the maker? Who made it? Sometimes in historic objects, sometimes there's a maker's mark, sometimes there's not. Sometimes we don't know that. But with some objects, there are. And, especially objects, for instance, where you've got in Egyptian objects with hieroglyphics or things like that, where you can actually start to tell a story or find out a bit more about the object. So I think I'm really excited about what Isabel and the curators are going to find. And then the other thing then is, what are we going to do with that information? How are we going to tell that responsibly and share that with as many people as we can?
So, I mean, I guess I hadn't thought about this, but it feels like you're reminding me of something that I came across through a sort of Chinese works of art exhibition on ceramics.
Okay.
And forgive me if I'm telling this inaccurately or for the scholars out there, but there's something which translates roughly to a chicken cup. And it's a tiny little bowl.
Okay.
And yet it's one of the most expensive things out there because it's imbued with significance to that
Yes.
society, that culture, that world that, you know, elevated it to that status. And so it feels like sometimes we prize things because of their uniqueness. Sometimes, and just for reference, this chicken cup isn't excellence in terms of the glaze quality or even the ceramic clay handling. It's something other. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is what's been your reflections on what things we ascribe high value to and what is value?
It's so interesting. And actually, because I've worked at the V&A, whereby, you know, you're thinking about, okay, design, fashion, you know, that's what we think, some people think of when they think of design. It's all about, it's not about solving problems, it's about glossy, high-end things. But yet, you know, some of the things we have in the collection at the British Museum are stone hand axes that are just the most exquisite, beautiful objects that you can see the mark of a human millions of years ago. This is 2 million years ago, you know, that is just absolutely inspiring and just takes you away to that time, and you can connect through objects with people in the past. And I think that's what's so fabulous about it. So I think it doesn't matter what material something is made of. It really doesn't. To me now, that has taught me so much working with archaeology. It's about how we learn and how we can learn about the past and how we can learn about other people and have a human connection with them through what they've made. Material culture through, you know, time. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, which sort of relates to this thing of value and sort of intimacy with an object, is I was working, as you know, on the sort of BBC Big Life Fix with a young man called Kyle. And I took first of all, a plaster cast of his hand, which didn't have all of the fingers developed, as you know. And what was so weird about it was that I've worked with plaster casts loads and loads and loads, it's fine. And yet, for some reason, when I was handling something which I realised was connected to a person who I felt very emotionally connected to, and in some ways quite protective of, and it seems sort of strange, but I was almost sort of unbelievably precious about getting this cast out safely, and that it didn't crack and it didn't break, even though I had 4 of them. So it was like, it was fine. No. Statistically, I was going to get one out. And then the weirdest thing was, I went through this other journey, and maybe you'll see where I'm going with this question, is that we later also just, you know, because it was one of those technology programs, we were curious to explore different things. We also did a high resolution 3D scan. And what was weird is I thought, and then we printed it out in resin, and you might think, that the 3D printed one wouldn't hold the same reverence or sort of sensitivity, and yet I felt it was just as comparable, even though it had lost, like, the fingerprints and details of the skin were gone. I still felt very sort of emotionally aware of what this was and the significance. And so do you think it is one of these things that the future of digital exhibitions isn't necessarily just trying to say, here is a infinitesimally scanned 3D object? Is it about, a little bit like photography, reframing the medium so that it does things which, being in a physical space next to another human being, that's not the point, you know? So how do you think you adapt with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting you're talking about the 3D printing of objects and digital objects, essentially, you know, and how we use those and how they can connect with people. So we do a sex and relationship education session with year 7s, with 11-year-olds, and we have some 3D printed objects, including the Ein Sacre lovers. We have 3D printed versions of that you can pass around. And obviously lighter, but they feel very, very similar, the surface. It just, people want that connection with objects. That's one of the things in museum that, again, I've been thinking about and trying to tackle for years and years. From when I worked at V&A on the jewellery gallery, and wanted people to be able to try on the jewellery, because I thought, well, if you're in a jewellery gallery, you want to try it on, don't you? So, and at that time, which was about 2003 or something ridiculous, there were very early magic mirrors being created by places like Gucci, in the States, but companies were doing that in Japan or Korea maybe even, but the technology wasn't there, really wasn't there, so we couldn't do it at that time, but things have moved on dramatically, and we are getting with mixed reality so much closer to looking at objects in that way. We're still at very early stages of that journey in the museum. We do a lot of different imaging in the museum, including X-ray, including CT scanning. We've got an X-ray machine in the museum, in the basement, massive, that can X-ray through stone. The wonderful thing about that is, where you've got cuneiform tablets that come in a stone envelope that we can't open, you can scan, and they have found that you can read the text inside of something.
I don't know what that is actually. What's a cuneiform?
So cuneiform tablet, cuneiform is one of the oldest languages in the world, from ancient Iraq, Mesopotamia. So those languages that are written on tablets, like the stone tablets in the Bible, that sort of period. Wow. And we have got loads of these stone tablets, and very small ones and bigger ones, and some of them include things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in stone, and they would have been in clay, so it would have been pressed, a tool pressing into the clay, then it dries out. And some of the ones that we have got that exist, for instance, from Ashurbanipal's library, because it was burnt to the ground, and so they're blackened. They were fired. They were made even stronger in a way through burning. So those sorts of things. So 3D printing, but also other types of infrared visualization, science, all of those things can tell us so much about objects and can really enhance exhibitions in that way. So we have about 250 3D scanned objects on Sketchfab that are free to download from the museum, including things like the Rosetta Stone, some of our really fantastic sculptures, all sorts of things are on there. And so you can use those, students can use those to create games, to put into projects, however you want to use them. We want people to use those objects. They're free for educational use to use, obviously not for commercial use, but they've got a Creative Commons license. But what do we do next? And how can that really help us to create digital exhibitions, for instance, that could tour, that could also, how can that help us to take objects to places where we perhaps couldn't take the actual object because of security or whatever other reason? How can we use digital objects? The other thing, of course, that's really important to this is haptics, that obviously I'm not an expert on, but I have encountered haptics in different ways. And, I think, again, the potential of haptics is wonderful, and, can't wait to see how
So maybe you could just
designers...
explain haptics, if that's all right, for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, well, if I can explain what it is. Well, how I came across haptics is through a computer software program that was created by some Scottish designers, whereby you could use the joystick from like a gaming joystick where you get haptic feedback, so you can feel what you're doing. So in a sense, digital haptics through controlling something, through touching something, you get the sensation of that object. So with the software, it's a bit like CAD software, but using haptics, you could actually create a shape, but you could actually push into it and feel the pressure of the shape moving.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. So you can imagine that idea of haptics applied feedback to feeling a digital object and feeling its weight, solidity, how you could turn it around, how you could feel how heavy it was. All of those things. I mean, this is something obviously quite futuristic in a way, but things move very fast in the world of digital, and that's where I think some of the exciting advances probably lie with haptics.
Well, it strikes me that you make an interesting thing about what it is to make something accessible to more people,
Yes.
sometimes at a sacrifice of something being taken away.
Yeah.
I mean, if I mention something like Hogarth and the Rake's Progress,
Yes.
I mean, at the time, he was sort of, marginalised because they said, it's not painting with oil, it's not a fine art. And yet these, correct me if I'm wrong, was it etchings?
Etchings, yeah.
But basically it meant that, the equivalent of the person who worked down the mill could buy one of these if they saved up, a little bit of money. And it felt that not only could they connect with something of a high quality that had expression, but I'm sure that you'd agree the biggest pull of this wasn't actually the etching quality, it was the story. It's that it was rare to have a really gritty story that was relatable, and not just the elite classes. So I mean, you could say that manga is both everything and also other. It's a complete explosion in what isn't reality as well.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, where do you think maybe this is a good ending question of where do you think the sort of future of our relationship with things that must be touched in certain senses of our body, and then where do we take other experiences that aren't necessarily just bound by the five senses?
Wow, that's another really amazing question. Oh, where do we go with this? I think certainly it's a big question for the cultural sector, for museums and galleries particularly. What's the next step to creating experiences? Do we need... I personally feel that the real experience of the object, you can't beat it. You cannot beat having... And that's going back to why I came into museums in the first place, is why I wanted to work in the museum rather than in a college or university, because I didn't have the objects. The objects were not there. We looked at pictures of them. We looked at images of them. Often they were not accurate, because you might be looking at a tiny image, but the object is enormous. And how can you get that sense of space and spatial, that whole thing of the sense of being with reality? So I think you need both. I strongly feel that we need to create experiences that are rooted in the real object, but using digital layering, in whatever way or shape or means, to actually just enhance that and make it a much more amazing experience. I mean, we did in our Ashbanapal exhibition, for instance, the plaques, the sculptures were mainly all brown stone. They were not something that naturally were easy to engage with, and they contained stories, so we use digital technology to pick out the different stories, and with text overlaid, so just projection mapping, very, very simple projection mapping, worked absolutely brilliantly. So I think it is, for me, it's about trying to bring those experiences together, but always having the connections with those real objects.
So I think that's such a lovely conclusion of just, it doesn't matter how much technology, at the end of the day, it's paint to what is the painting, and we're still ultimately humans interested in stories and interested in each other. So I love that, and I'm really excited to see what goes next. If there's anything else that we forget, we'll put links in the bottom of the video.
Okay. Great.
But thank you. So, I mean, I actually really want to... I've got a 3D printer next to me. I want to actually print the little...
Yes, definitely.
But no, I can't thank you enough for taking the time, Sarah. It's been a real pleasure and an honour.
No, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Great. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, bye.